The most dangerous invitation Gustav III ever accepted wasn't written on paper. It was the ball itself, a masked event at the Royal Opera House in Stockholm, the 16th of March, 1792. He'd been warned. A letter with a broken seal had arrived weeks before, naming names, naming the night. He read it. He handed it to his secretary. He ordered his uniform pressed. Stockholm in March of 1792 was a city where the opera house and the gallows served the same function. Spectacle for a king who believed that theater was the highest form of power. Gustav had built his reign on that belief. He'd staged coups and constitutions with the same instinct a playwright applies to a third act. He'd made Sweden, for a few decades, genuinely brilliant. A northern court that competed with Paris in ideas and with Vienna in music. He'd also made enemies with the precision of a craftsman, one aristocrat at a time, one privilege stripped, one old family humiliated at court, until the list of men who wanted him dead had grown longer than the list of men who didn't. Here's the part nobody mentions in the official accounts. Gustav knew about the threat before he dressed that evening. His valet knew. 3 members of court knew. The warning had circulated for weeks in the kind of whispers that aren't really whispers at all. Urgent, specific, named. And none of it changed anything. When his carriage rolled to a stop outside the opera house, he stepped down onto the cobblestones, adjusted his black domino mask, checked the white feathers in his hat, and walked toward the entrance. Not a sword, a mask, as if the most dangerous night of his reign required the wrong kind of armor. The Royal Opera House was his own creation. He'd funded it, shaped its program, sometimes written its librettos himself. He wasn't simply attending a party, he was walking into a building that existed because he'd willed it into existence. The gilding, the chandeliers, the long mirrored corridors, all of it his. The thread inside it, also in a way, his. He'd built the room and he'd built the hatred in equal measure. The conspirators had a simple plan, which is the only kind that sometimes works. Jacob Johan Ankerström, a former officer whose grudge against the crown had been accumulating for years, like water behind a dam, had been chosen as the man with the pistol. Not because he was the most passionate among them. Several men in that ballroom hated the king with greater heat, but because he was steady, cold over fire, patience over rage. He'd loaded the weapon carefully, a lead ball and rusty nails, a combination chosen not for elegance, but for certainty. The rust wasn't carelessness, it was design. There were others there too. The conspiracy reached deep. Old noble families, stripped of privileges by Gustav's reforms, men who'd met in private apartments and passed lists and argued about timing for months. This wasn't one man's impulsive act. It was a committee's decision, rendered in lead and iron. Ankerström was the instrument. The room was full of the men who'd built him. For nearly an hour, nothing visible happened. The hall held hundreds of people in the powdered wigs and silk gowns and gilded masks of Gustavian court dress. Not costumes, not theater. This was how Swedish nobility actually dressed in 1792. The air layered with candle heat and perfume, and the constant low pressure of the orchestra filling the space below the chandeliers. Ankerström moved through it, losing the king in the crowd, finding him again, waiting for the geometry of bodies to open. At one point, he was close enough to touch him. He waited. 2 Confederates watched the exits. A third stood near the orchestra, doing nothing, watching everything. The clock moved. Let's be honest about what happened next, because the official version makes it sound cleaner than it was. The moment came near 11 in the evening. Ankerstrom pressed the pistol to the king's lower back and fired once. The sound went nowhere useful, swallowed by 500 bodies, 200 conversations, 30 years of Baroque plasterwork designed to trap sound rather than release it. Gustav staggered. The crowd around him assumed he'd stumbled on the dance floor. He said quietly, to no one in particular, "I have been wounded." A single sentence from a king, spoken at ballroom volume. They brought him out into the cold air. The blood on his cloak spread slowly, not the fast, bright hemorrhage of a man already gone, but the measured leak of a wound that had missed the vital center by centimeters. The ball had entered his left hip. The nails had scattered nearby, several lodging in the tissue. The surgeons who arrived in the hours that followed were cautiously optimistic, which meant the king was alive, the wound hadn't pierced the bowel, and nobody understood yet what the rust would do. Here's the part nobody teaches in school. Bacteria enter through the wound channel. They travel along the embedded nails, which the surgeons leave partially in place because removal risks rupturing blood vessels. The immune response escalates, fever, inflammation, the body burning through its reserves fighting an enemy it can't locate precisely. Without antiseptic technique, every instrument that touches the wound carries more contamination inward. Without antibiotics, the infection has no ceiling. It spreads at its own pace with no urgency about the schedule. The surgeons change compresses. They administer opium. They write optimistic reports, then contradictory reports, then optimistic reports again. The king's temperature rises, steadies, rises again. And here we understand why the 13 days that followed became a different kind of horror. Not the horror of sudden death, which is at least clean in its finality, but the horror of a death that kept not arriving. Gustav was conscious. He received ministers. He dictated correspondence. He spoke about the Russian campaign he'd been planning, about repertoire for the next opera season, about judicial reform. Between these conversations, the wound was working. Imagine what it means to be the physician standing beside that bed. Every morning you assess the king and carry your report to the court. Every morning the court, ministers, foreign ambassadors, aristocrats who may or may not have known about the plot, waits for your words to decide whether to start the machinery of succession or hold it in suspension one more day. You're not just treating a wound, you're holding a government in place with your diagnosis. In the antechambers of the palace, whispers moved faster than your reports. Ankerstrom had been arrested within hours of the shooting. He hadn't fled, hadn't even tried, had walked home and gone to bed. But the investigation behind him was opening into something vast. The names surfacing weren't commoners. They were some of the oldest families in Sweden. Men who'd attended the same ball. Men now sending polite letters inquiring after the king's health, signed with crests that had appeared in Swedish heraldry for 3 centuries. The king was dying, but not yet dead, which meant nobody knew exactly what they were supposed to feel, or plan, or confess. On the 26th of March, the wound won. The infection had spread far enough inward that the body couldn't compensate any further. Gustav III died in the early morning, 13 days after the shot. He was 46 years old. He'd ruled for 21 years. He'd built Sweden's first permanent opera house, founded the Swedish Academy, the institution that still selects the Nobel laureate in literature every October, introduced religious tolerance, abolished judicial torture, and broken the political dominance of the nobility over the crown. He'd also started a war with Russia without parliamentary consent, suppressed the press, and accumulated the enemies who sent Ankerstrom into that ballroom with a weapon loaded for maximum damage. Ankerstrom was flogged publicly on 3 consecutive days, then beheaded. His head went up on a spike. The aristocratic conspirators were imprisoned, exiled, stripped of titles. The plot had killed the king, but hadn't changed what the king had built. Sweden continued. The opera house continued. The academy continued. But here's what doesn't fit in any official account. He had 13 days. 13 days in which the wound was patient and the king wasn't yet gone, in which the men who'd ordered his death were still in the city, still breathing the same cold Stockholm air, still signing their polite letters of concern. What does a man think about in 13 days when the body keeps refusing to finish what the bullet started? Whether the theater was worth it, whether the enemies were necessary or just inevitable, whether the invitation should have been declined after all. He left no record of those final hours that answers the question. Only the wound moving inward, steady as the man who designed it.